We're so glad you're joining us tonight. And we are working our way down through our study of all the tribes. And we're on page 4 of, I believe it's Romans number 46 notes, the tribe of Zebulun. And so we are on page 4, we are at note number 14. And we know that much of the tribe of Zebulun today is found in Holland or the Netherlands. And so Dutch shipping and exploration, and the Dutch are... Yeah, exploration, E-X-P-L-O-R-A-T-I-O-N. You're welcome. And that helped to pave the way, actually, for the future development, believe it or not, of North America. And that should be North America. And Australia. A-U-S-T-R-A-L-I-A. How many know that North America and Australia are a far piece from each other? Oh, yes. And yet the Dutch began to explore these areas. I believe did we pass out maps? Do you have maps of where the Dutch are? If you didn't, I'll make that and try to get those to you. If you are at, yes, yeah, it would look like this, because it will show you all of the countries that, the nations to which the Dutch have sent explorers and where they are found today. Okay, so if you're at home, you cannot download that. We just didn't get that uploaded. So if you need that map and want to put that with your notes, just call us and let us know, and we'll mail that to you. So the Dutch were the first to colonize South Africa. So let me ask you this question, you at home and you sitting in front of me. When God said, I am going to scatter you and spread you across to the ends of the earth, notice how that has happened. As the tribes migrated and then they settled in certain areas, and guess what? Once they're settled in those areas, guess what? They didn't stop. So we know already that many of the Dutch shipping and exploration, as they went out from Holland and the Netherlands, they began to go to North America and South Africa. So what is now known as Indonesia was previously referred to as the Dutch East Indies when it was ruled by the Dutch. But, you know, Indonesia is quite a far piece from Holland. And yet they've been spread across all the places in the world. Ceylon was once a Dutch colony, as was New York. And of course, New York was originally known as New Amsterdam, as in Amsterdam, Holland. The Dutch were also active in South America, Africa, and India. And this is one you might not be familiar with. They were pioneers in trading with Japan. And actually there are Japanese groups who have cultural behavior patterns and cultural patterns that are similar to Israelite ones. Why? Well, it's been passed on, and all of a sudden they start trading with Japan, and you know how that happens. You know, have you ever heard of war brides? I mean, have you ever heard of war brides? The soldiers are out there and they fall in love and they marry. Well, guess what? So you have an explorer from Holland. He's involved in trading with Japan, and guess what happens? Falls in love. They have children who have children who have children. And guess what? There are certain cultural habits, family cultural habits that get passed on. And you can visit Japan today, and here are these little Japanese people. They're my kind of people because they're short. And strangely enough, I went to Bible college, and I had a friend in Bible college named Kay. And sure enough, we graduated from Bible college. And now here's the interesting thing: she's like tall. She's like tall like twice of me, but she's not almost. But I think she was something like 5'11" and 3/4. She was tall. Wouldn't you know it? They sent her to Japan as a missionary. I mean, she loved, but I'll never forget. We were a Sunday school class way back in decades ago. We supported her while she was in Japan, and she sent us this really letter, just pleading. She said, "I don't care whatever you send me, but please send me." I shouldn't say. Well, I guess I can say it. It's not really bad. She said, "Would you please send me pantyhose? I cannot get pantyhose in Japan." Well, that's understandable. They don't have any 5'11" women in Japan. But they have some of the same cultural patterns and behaviors. Why? It was passed down. Now, historically, in note 15, historically, the Netherlands became part of the Holy Roman Empire and actually was governed by Germany. And that's where you may want to see that map a little bit to see what happened there. And then later, they were ruled by the Spanish branch of the Habsburg dynasty. So what do you see now, even in the Netherlands? Well, you had Germanic influence, you had Spanish influence. Now, we all remember, probably world history, the Spanish Inquisition. And Jews were very comfortable living in Spain prior to the Spanish Inquisition. And if you were around when we looked at the tribe of Judah, we know that the Zara branch of Judah left very early from Egypt and went into Iberia, which is Portugal and Spain, that area in there. And they were there for a long time. And that, of course, is the whole story of how Skoda and went on and ended up in Ireland. Descendants ended up in Ireland and what? Scotland. So there were those Jews, and they were indeed Yehudites because they were of the tribe of Judah. And they were in Spain, and then the Spanish Inquisition occurred. And what happened is they began to literally murder and slaughter Jewish people in Spain if they did not convert to Christianity. It was either convert or we're going to kill you with the sword. This was exactly, and they were torturing people. It was a horrible time. And so Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition found refuge in the Netherlands. And so then what happened, the Netherlands, Holland, the Dutch, they were going to struggle for independence from Spain because they were this portion of this colony of Spain. They were quite influential. So what happened is the Jews then, who have fled to Netherlands for protection, then they turned around and supported the Dutch in their struggle for independence from the Spanish. Now the Jews who came to the Netherlands were treated well, and they prospered. And that shouldn't be surprising. Why? Because God gave a promise. He said what? Wherever you go, you'll be the head and not the tail. And the blessings of God were given to the descendants of Abraham. What happened is what has often happened as Israelite peoples, groups, and Yehudahites have traveled. And it's considered by the Jewish community today to be a problem, and that is intermarriage. Now obviously there are certain sects, the Hasidic Jews, the ultra-Orthodox do not intermarry. But many of the other, for example, Reconstruction, the group called Reconstructionist Jews and Reform Jews, they have a great deal of intermarriage, okay, with other people groups. Orthodox, not so much, and then obviously Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox do not, but there's quite a bit of, and those who consider themselves not religious Jews, but just biological Jews, there is a great deal of intermarriage, and if you read any Jewish publications, it is considered a major problem given the percentage of intermarriage today. I remember in Hebrew school, it was an issue that was often discussed, was the intermarriage. But what happened was these people intermarried with the locals. And so the Dutch people say that there is not a single village in all of the Netherlands. So that means there isn't a single community in all of the Netherlands that does not have a family of Jewish descent. Now, I want to stop here for a minute because that's Jewish descent. That's Yehudahite descent. We haven't even touched on Israelite descent. Any questions? Comments? Okay. In note 18, during the German occupation of the Netherlands during World War II, about 75% of the Jewish population perished. We'll stop there. Just put that. 3/4. 3/4 of the Jewish population of Holland perished during the German occupation of Holland. And anyone know a very famous individual from Holland? Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom. And that whole story, The Hiding Place, if you've read the book. And if you know anything about Corrie ten Boom, Corrie ten Boom, when she ministered, she just broke across all the age limits. I mean, and I'll never, during the Jesus People movement, Corrie ten Boom, if you know anything about, if you've seen the movie The Jesus Revolution, or you lived through that time, which I did, I am a product of the Jesus People movement in Trinity Gospel Temple on 5th and High. And I would get cassette, I know. I have youth around here saying, what is that? I say, what? Cassette tapes. And every week they would send me a set of cassette tapes of Lonnie Frisbee's teaching, Chuck Smith's teaching, and Corrie ten Boom would come, often. And she would just teach in the Jesus People movement. And I mean, if you can imagine, youth sitting and hanging on every word that Corrie ten Boom as she shared the Word of God. Those are wonderful times, but she and her family, her sister Betsy, of course, perished in Ravensbrück. And then she didn't stop. She's freed by a clerical error that was a miracle of God. How many know that? And she was released. In fact, she was released just before her group was ready to be executed. But she still had work to do for the Lord. And then of course, she called herself Tramp for the Lord. She called herself and she went all over the world, including confronting one of her German guards and actually bringing him to salvation. It's tremendous. But when you think about it, 3/4 of all the Jewish people in Holland perished. And when anti-Jewish measures were first introduced by the Germans, dock workers in Holland went on strike. And other acts of resistance occurred. You know, there are times when I believe God's people need to resist and say no. And I'm telling you, we are living in a culture and time where it's necessary that you and I take a stand and then stand there and say, we're not budging. This is wrong, this is right, and we're going to take a stand, and we're going to keep standing no matter what. I think about when Martin Luther nailed his theses to the door at Wittenberg. And they said, well, what are you going to do? He said, here I stand, I can do nothing else. So we need to understand this. There are times just that, I mean, they weren't violent, they just resisted. They just threw, monkey wrenches in the machinery, thank you. It takes a whole class to help me teach. But they would do little things to, just make it not work right. Sometimes they literally would throw sand into the machinery. They said, we don't know what happened here, we can't get it to work. But perhaps one of the most well-known Christian families that I just told you, who aided Jewish residents during this time, was the Ten Boom family. And the book, The Hiding Place, and I believe it's still somewhere out there, you can't get it, by Corrie Ten Boom, tells of the courage of this family and the subsequent imprisonment of Corrie and her sister Betsy in the Ravensbrück concentration camp. And of course, Betsy died there. Corrie miraculously survived and was released because of a clerical error. And she was released just before she was scheduled to be executed. And a museum that's dedicated to the family's courageous acts is located in the family's former home in Haarlem, Netherlands. There is actually a building right across from King David's Tower as you enter in to the Zion Gate into the old city of Jerusalem. It's right across the street. And it is the Ten Boom Center. And it, of course, is Mike Evans' organization. And it's on your free day, if you're going to Israel with us, on your free day you might want to, because it's within walking distance of where we'll be staying in Jerusalem. You might want to just walk down there, because it's real easy. It's right across the street from Tower of David, and I believe they're open all the time. Okay, any question about?
Sharon, was she the one that got the Bible?
Yes.
Okay.
If you're at home, the question came: is she the one that was smuggled in a Bible into the concentration camp so she could have Bible study with the people who were the women who were incarcerated? Yes. And I realized what she said. She said, as you know, they would strip all of the women when they came in and make sure they weren't bringing anything in. And so she was in line, and the woman in front of, all the women that went ahead of her, and then the woman in front of her, they did it. And she said in a moment, not a great big long prayer, she just said, Lord, you who made blind eyes see, please make seeing eyes blind. It's exactly what happened. They didn't. They just pushed her ahead. And they began to search and strip the woman who was behind her. And she was able to smuggle a Bible, and a Bible that God protected from their eyes the whole time she was in Ravensbrück, as she led both Jew and Gentile to the saving knowledge of Yeshua. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. Unfortunately, as in any place, not everyone opposed the Nazi regime. And as you know, it was a neighbor of the Ten Booms who turned them in. There was substantial collaboration, collaboration. There was this collaboration with the enemy on the part of the Amsterdam city administration, the government. Also, the Dutch municipal police and the Dutch railway, R-A-I-L-W-A-Y, or railroad, however you want to put your note down there. Workers, and guess what they did? The railroad workers helped to round up and deport Jews to the death camps. I'm not saying obviously they were not the majority, but I think it was not the whole of the Netherlands. After the war, on the whole, the Netherlands supported the state of Israel.
The what?
The state, S-T-A-T-E, of Israel, I-S-R-A-E-L, Israel. And in the immediate years after the birth of the nation of Israel, believe it or not, Netherlands was the best friend that Israel, in Europe, that Israel had. Very supportive of the fledgling state. And many Dutch Gentiles also felt a strong affinity for the Jewish people. Now, obviously some of those were probably genuine Gentiles. But how many of them could possibly have been of Israelite descent? Now, some of the Dutch Gentiles actually converted to Judaism. They sure will. Some of the last sentence, some of them converted, C-O-N-V-E-R-T-E-D, they actually converted to Judaism. Now, when we compare them to most other European nations, the Netherlands is still on relatively, even today, friendly terms with Israel. They're still on friendly terms. Much of Europe is not. However, there is a large Muslim, M-U-S-L-I-M, Muslim immigrant presence in the Netherlands today, and they are pushing for a more Palestinian approach. It's kind of interesting because you will have people who will get on certain hobby horse issues in a nation, and then they'll turn these issues into something much larger than they should be. And so one of the things that's happened in the Netherlands is that domestic factors have resulted in pressure to outlaw Jewish ritual slaughter. And let me just say this, oh, that's just too bloody. Well, please hear me. Trust me, Jewish ritual slaughter is much more humane than commercial slaughterhouses. Because in ritual slaughter, very, very, very sharp knives are used, with one slice against the carotid, one against the jugular, and boom, that's it. That animal suffers not at all. Boom, it's over. I will tell you that in our slaughterhouses here, that is not what happens, and some of you have seen some of the horrific films of that. But they're outlawing Jewish ritual slaughter. They also are outlawing the practice of circumcision. C-I-R-C-U-M-C-I-S-I-O-N. Circumcision. And when you understand, for a Jewish family, that's very important. Because basically, the Brit Milah is basically called the cutting of covenant, and there was a reason for that. It goes all the way back to God made a promise. God made a promise to Abraham, and I guess I don't think I'll get, because it's in the Bible, so I shouldn't get knocked off of YouTube with this. But remember when Abraham was looking for a wife for his son. Now remember what God had promised Abraham, that through his seed would come the promised one. And the blessing would be passed on. And so he said, I don't want you to take a son, from my son, a wife from here. I want you to go. And remember, he says to his servant, because remember what he said? He said, listen, I don't have an heir. The only person is Eliezer, my servant. And that's all I have. If that's the way you want to do this, Lord, okay, but that's all I have. And God told him, no. Your descendant will come from your own loins. So he calls his servant to him to go. And in the Bible, what you will read in English says that he touched Eliezer's thigh, right? And he promise me. Can I just say, go a little bit higher? And there was a reason for that, because it was going to come through the seed of Abraham. That's how the Messiah would come. He'd be of the seed of Abraham. And he said, promise me on the covenant God made with me that you will not get any other woman other than what? Family. And he promised. So, can you understand how important then circumcision is to Jewish families today? So it's a big deal when they have outlawed it, trying to outlaw it. And again, you'd have to understand, we serve a God who is ultra intelligent. Nobody is more intelligent than God. Amen. And he even told him which day, right? On the 8th day. You want to know why? Because that is the day after birth when the blood clots faster than any other time. Isn't that interesting? God knew that. Well, he did create us. He did create us. God, do you ever just sit back and say, God, your plan is just mind-blowing? But it's his plan. So in the past, note 22, in the past, many of the Dutch believed in the Bible. We know they did, because we talked all about some of the things they did and some of their traditions. But today, atheism and hedonism has taken a strong hold over the population. If you look at anything in Holland, I mean, I would just say it's practically anything goes in Holland. It's open. It's open on the streets. It's really bad.
What does he do? He does.
Anything for pleasure. You know, it's like if it feels good to you and you want to do it. You can think of all sorts. Any type of perversion you can think of would come under hedonism for pleasure. There was a Billy Graham film, I mean, it's been so many, probably decades ago now, that was filmed about the society in Holland, not the youngin. I know I'm probably older than anybody in this room, so I remember that. But it was filmed in Holland, and it was showing, well, we're close, a lot of the hedonism in Holland. I mean, it's just, I guess I would have to say it's probably the immorality capital of the world. That's how bad it is in Holland. And so this has resulted in an increased hostility and estrangement towards the Jewish people. Because if they are practicing their Judaism, there's a strict code of behavior. And so they are obviously opposed to this type of cultural behavior. So there's this great hostility. Now I want to give you some notes. I want to give you some notes because on the subject of Dutch archives, there's going to be Dutch archives on accused Nazi collaborators. And these records are going to be open to the public in 2025. And I just wanted to, actually what happened is I actually came across this information after I had typed and printed these notes. So the Dutch government is planning to throw open information about 300,000 people who were investigated for their collaboration with the Nazis. And this will probably be a move that could accelerate a reckoning with the Netherlands Holocaust record. Okay. So for the past 70 years, only researchers and relatives of those accused of collaborating with the Nazis. Now think about this for a minute. I didn't say victims or descendants of victims. I said researchers and relatives of those accused. So if you're a relative of somebody who's accused, you want to do what? You want to get rid of that information, seal it. And so they were the only people who could access the information. But a law guarding the data, that data, is going to expire at the beginning of 2025. And so the war in court, now we would call it the war court. In Dutch it's called the war in court. And that's a Dutch consortium that's devoted to preserving history. In other words, they're saying we need to put out the history there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that we can learn from it. And they have announced that it is going to make the records available online. Now, how many know if it's online, everybody can get that information? And so they said as soon as that privacy law expires, they're putting those records online. And this effort drew some attention from when a New York Times article explored concerns that the hopes and concerns that were held by people in the Netherlands would be affected by the lies within the sweeping information that's there. There have been a lot of lies that have been told. And so they're saying it's a sensitive archive, and basically what they're saying is, do you really want to open this up? And what they have said, they said, well, you know, for years, the whole theme of collaboration has been a kind of taboo. Don't talk about collaboration. And he said, we don't talk about collaboration that much. But now we're 80 years further. And one person said, it's time for us to face this dark part of our history. And I'm just going to take a little sidebar, if I may. I feel that one of the worst things that have happened in our country, probably in the last 18 months or 2 years, has been this movement to literally obliterate anything having to do with our history, good, bad, and ugly. I feel that rather than obliterate it, tear it down, burn it up, smash it to smithereens, we need to leave it and acknowledge the bad in our history, and acknowledge the dark parts of our history and say, listen, we've got to own this, and we then have to say never again. Never again. So it's not a matter we destroy it. We say, listen, there it is, and this is what happened, this is what happened, and this is what happened. Never should have happened. And then together, we're going to link arms, we're going to link ourselves together and say, never again. But see, if you whitewash your history, you can't do that. And so I at least give them some credit for saying we've got to face this time in our history and make sure that anything like this never happens again. Because here's the problem. If you get rid of everything and the next generation comes,
Where are they going to learn from?
they're not going to learn anything. And guess what? If you don't remember your past, you're doomed to repeat it. So the Netherlands, believe it or not, has the world's second highest number of documented saviors of Jews. Second highest. But it also has admitted that they had many collaborators who, aided by the topography, okay, which is the land of Holland, because there weren't all those many places to hide, and Holland's proximity to Germany, helped the Nazis achieve the highest death rate. So the highest death rate of Jews anywhere in Nazi-occupied Europe happened in Holland. So the highest number of Jews killed by the Nazis were killed in Holland. At the same time, it has the second highest number of documented saviors of Jews. How many know there was a right versus wrong battle going on there? Of 140,000 Dutch Jews, 140,000, more than 100,000 were murdered. And anyone remember a very famous Jewish girl? Anne Frank. The most famous, probably the most famous victim of the Nazis in the Netherlands was the teenaged diarist Anne Frank. And guess what? They were given up by their neighbors and acquaintances. So the Dutch government investigated 300,000 people for collaborating with the Nazis. And to their credit, Holland caused 65,000 of them to stand trial in a special court system in the years after World War II. So they did indeed prosecute 65,000. But guess what? It was only in 2020. How many of that was just 3 years ago? Only in 2020 did the Dutch government apologize for failing to protect Jews during the Holocaust. It took them until 2020 to apologize. And guess what? A town square was named for a mayor who handed Jews to the Nazis. Still named a town square. I'm not talking about naming it during that time. I'm talking about naming it afterwards. Okay. So this archive access is going to be in 2025. It's going to offer widespread access to the files, and some researchers who have had access have said that they're quite detailed, and it's really detailed this time. It's going to have great ease of access, so anyone who can get online will be able to do that. They have stated, for better or worse, the only way to resolve some of these issues is to have your eyes wide open and look at the past openly and accept what the history really was. And one way is to look at that through the paper trail in the archives. The documents will be digitized to allow searches by keywords or names. You will be able to type in the name of a victim, and listen to this, and discover who was accused of betraying them. Some of that was done like basically word of mouth. That's why we know who betrayed the Frank family. We know who betrayed the 10 Boones, because Corey found that out by basically doing physical legwork. But this will be able, family members, descendants of those who were betrayed will know who betrayed their family. The effort will be second major digitization, say that 30 times, of a Holocaust document trove in the Netherlands. In 2021, the Red Cross transferred ownership of its index card archive that had 160,000 cards with personal information of Dutch Jews. And they have now turned that over to the National Holocaust Museum in the Netherlands. So there are going to be some. Paul Shapiro, who is the director of the Office of International Affairs at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. If you have, I would just say this, if you have never visited the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, you owe it to yourself to go. It is quite an experience. Of you sitting in front of me, how many have ever been? Just 2 of us, okay. I took my mother, and when you go there and you actually start the tour through the museum, you are given a name. You know, when you get your ticket, you're given a name, and that name is someone who went through the Holocaust. And then they say, well, now go into this room and wait there, and then, then you'll start the tour. It's quite an experience, and if you go, I don't want to ruin what happens, but it was quite an emotional moment, because what happens is you're sitting there, and then the doors open, and they say, okay, you go here, now, come in there. And then the door closes. It's dark, totally dark, and then all of a sudden the lights come on, you realize something. And I will say this with you. There's no way out. Not from the inside. And basically what it is, all those sections are train boxcars. And you're there for quite a while. and then the doors open and you start your tour. And then at the end, you plug in your little card to find out what happened to the person whose card you've been carrying throughout. It's a very moving experience. And by the way, one of the reasons, someone asked me, why is that not the way the Israeli Holocaust Museum is done, and there's a reason for that. It's just too emotionally heightened for the Israeli. I can tell you that is an extremely moving experience. Some of you have been to the one in Israel. But again, I just say, if we don't remember the past, we're doomed to repeat the future. And I'm going to end with this by with this study by saying this. It was in 1999, and I was at the Holocaust Museum in Israel. And I actually know exactly where I was. I was in the area where you're looking out at Corrie ten Boom's market. And our guide, Nomi, turned to me, and I've shared this before, but I don't know that I've shared it with our audience watching. And she turned to me, she said, "You do know that the next persecution is going to be against Christians." Now this was 1999. And actually we were planning to perhaps go into Syria the next time we went. I mean, that's kind of how it was, that, you know, things were kind of thawing a little bit. And I mean, they changed in 2 years, they changed drastically. But she said, and I need to warn you. She said, because I don't think, and I took it the way she, you know, she said, because you Christians aren't realizing how close the persecution of Christians is coming. And I don't think I have to convince anyone sitting in front of me now. So there is, again, and I say it again, we need to be alert, take a stand, and then stand. And many people are alive because they saw what was happening 6 months or a year before it happened. Got out. So understand something. The tribe of Zebulun, mostly in Holland, but they're also where? They're all over the world because of all of that. And that's why I gave you the map. Again, if you're at home and you would like to get this map, we will get it to you. So you can look at that map and see all the places, basically, that descendants of Zebulun have gone, because they've gone everywhere. And you can look at that map and see primarily Holland, but from there they've gone to other places. And believe it or not, we're now at the tribe of Benjamin. And the tribe of Benjamin is the last of the tribes. Started with Reuben, and here we are at the tribe of Benjamin. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of the background. Remember, there were 2 sons that were born to Israel, Jacob Israel, from his beloved wife, Rachel. And those sons were who? Joseph and Benjamin. And we know that Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. And Rachel's tomb, you know, there's the tomb of the patriarchs, and Jacob Israel is, of course, buried at Hebron, and he's buried at Hebron with Leah. Rachel is buried in a tomb in Bethlehem. That's where she died. And it came time for him to be, Rachel was still in Bethlehem. So, and understand something. Leah, I feel a little sorry for Leah. And I think, but guess what? God accepted, God looked at her and he blessed her. She is considered one of the matriarchs of Israel to this day. It was just, you know, you can imagine. Yet, I think there was some affection there because obviously Leah gave him sons. But these were the two that were born to Rachel, we love, and worked another 7 years. He worked 7 years for Leah, and then got surprised on their wedding night, and then worked another 7 years for Rachel. Rachel did not name Benjamin. So it's kind of interesting. So if we will start a little bit, we can get a few minutes on in the tribe. The tribes of Judah. Now, when the kingdom split, and I know some of you have come in at different times, so let me give some background, maybe because we need this background. When the children of Israel went into the promised land and crossed the Jordan River, and they are united, and then eventually what did they do? They said, we want a king. You know, be very careful when you want to be like all the other nations. And remember, they kept saying to Samuel, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king, we want to be like all the other nations. And Samuel got upset. How many know Samuel got upset about that? God talked to Samuel and said, Samuel, you know, don't be so upset because it's not you they're rejecting me. So they get a king. Now, their first king was Shaul, but we know him as Saul. And he started out well. Started out good. You know, Brother Dave has a saying, and I remember it ever since 5th and High. And he would tell us as a staff, always remind us, he said, be very careful that you don't believe your own press releases. And I remember hearing Oral Roberts say something that his mother said to him. She said, Oral, you'll be okay as long as you stay little in your own eyes. You'll be big in God's eyes. That's what matters. And so what happened with Saul is what? He got big in his own eyes. And he's one of those, I can do that. Remember he said, hey, here's the prophets. I can do that. I'm going to, it doesn't matter what God, the path that God has laid for me. I'm going to do what I want to do because I'm king. And of course God gave another king. And David. And so then you fast forward, and David passes off away, and his son Solomon. And there was some arguing over who should be king. Solomon becomes king. Of course, Solomon's mother was Bathsheba. And he becomes king. And guess what? He started out well, right? He started out good. That you know, can you imagine? Well, can you imagine following David, your father David, on the throne? Think about this for a minute. David, you remember what they shouted? Oh, Saul has slain his 1,000, but David his 10,000. Woo, David. And now David has passed on, and here's Solomon. First of all, Don't you think the people of Israel know the history? His mother. Your mother is Bathsheba. Okay? And yet, notice where Solomon turned. He said, Lord, God. He said, basically, I'm nothing. And here's this great people. And the Lord said to him, says, Solomon, ask of me, and I'll give you whatever you ask. I'll give you. And he said, I want wisdom. How can I rule these people without wisdom? And you know, God told him. He gave it. Did he give him wisdom? He said, because you've asked, I'll give you that. But he said, because you've asked for that, I'll give you riches too. And he did have wisdom. I mean, he had great wisdom. Remember the story of the two women living in the land?
I love that.
I mean, that's wisdom. And so the two women come, and one woman says, well, we're starving, and we decided, and then it said, well, today we'll kill your son and eat him. And so we did. And then it was time to eat her son, and she hit him. Yeah, she hit him. And then the other one said, no. No. She said, so we need to just eat this son. The other says, no. He's my son. Yeah, and the woman said, no, he's my son. We already ate her son. This is my son. And she said, no, he's my son. So Solomon, in his great wisdom, what does he do? He said, bring me a sword. He said, give me the baby. This is wisdom. He said, okay, we'll just cut him in half and give one to each of you, one half to each of you. And immediately, the real mother spoke up and says, no, give him to her. Why? Because that's a mother's heart. And Solomon knew that. He was wise enough to know that a woman would sacrifice her own baby, keeping him to keep him alive. So, great wisdom. But Solomon had a problem.
Women.
Now, you men would probably appreciate this.
Well, I wouldn't.
No, wait, you don't know what I'm going to say yet, Sherry.
I don't think so. I don't think a man would appreciate that many women.
I'm saying it. I mean, can you imagine? No. You got 700 wives and 300 concubines. You got 1,000 women you got to keep happy. Okay? But here's what happened. Remember, he started out right. He started out saying, Lord, give me wisdom. Because I mean, do you know what it's like to follow this, a great king or a great pastor? You know, let me give you an example you might be able to appreciate. Could you imagine what it would be like to follow a Jack Hayford at Church on the Way? You know, do you know anything about Pastor Jack? And they say, this is your new pastor. And everybody's looking like, okay. See, I grew up in a pastor's home. And where my father was at one church, and then he went to another church and followed another pastor. You know what he heard all the time? Pastor so-and-so didn't do it that way. We always have done it this way. So can you imagine what Solomon was feeling to follow David? Well, David never did it. David was the greatest king we've ever had. So anyhow, he gets involved with a lion. Now, it was a different situation. It was not like, oh, I'm in love. No, it was kings would marry women to bring an alliance with another country, and then you'd have all, well, we want to have peace, right? So what happened is Solomon married wives who worshiped false gods. And they turned his heart, and then they began to, and then he had to make allowances for the false gods of his wives. And it's, if you love me, you'll build an altar for my God. And that's what happened. And how many know if you're going to build a whole bunch of altars for false gods, and then that takes money. And where does the government get money? From you. Taxes. You think it just started in our lifetime? No, no, no. And then what happens? Solomon dies. And his son, Rehoboam, comes to the throne. I'm giving you a lot of history, hundreds of years of history, but it becomes very important when we understand who Benjamin and Judah are. So what happened is Solomon's advisors, who were older and wiser, says to Rehoboam, Rehoboam, you've got to do something about this tax problem. I think we need to have some people just kind of take a trip east and say the same thing. Solomon, you've got to do something. If you will take your hand, this heavy hand of tax, off of the people, they will follow you, they will serve you, they will do anything you ask them. And then he talked to his own buddies, you know, the younger ones, to say, and you know what they said to him? They said, Rehoboam, you need to show him who's boss. I'm putting it in 2023 language. You need to show him who's in charge. He said, here's what you need to tell him. If you think my father gave you a tax burden, wait till you see the burden I'm going to lay on him. That's in the Bible, by the way. And what happened was 10 tribes of the northern part of Israel said, no way, we're out of here. And they left. About a third of the tribe of Levi, the tribe of Benjamin, and the tribe of Judah remained in the southern part of the nation of Israel with their capital at Jerusalem. And there were parts of the tribe of Simeon, because remember, Simeon's land allotment was right in the middle of Judah. And the other 10 tribes, now think about this for a minute. They said, we're going to have the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. And our capital is going to be at Samaria. And so, and by the way, we need a king. So we're going to send, if you will look at, if you understand, when you and I ever stray from the Lord, it's not bright. It's kind of stupid. For 400 years, the children of Israel had cried out to God in Egypt, deliver us, deliver us. So now they've got their own kingdom now, the northern kingdom of Israel. And Jeroboam had fled. Now, there had been a promise given to him. Because the prophet of God took and he tore 10 pieces of cloth and said, it's going to be yours. But he had fled to Egypt. Guess what? The northern kingdom of Israel called for Jeroboam to come from Egypt and become king over them. Now, the fact that the kingdom was divided did not change what God had said to his people. He said 3 times a year, you need to come from wherever you are to Jerusalem 3 times a year. Passover, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And you need to come to Jerusalem. Well, Jeroboam wasn't stupid. He said, oh, I'm going to have a problem here, because here's a problem. I need to develop a relationship with these people where they're looking to me. And so he said, I can't have them 3 times a year crossing over the border into the southern kingdom of Judah to Jerusalem. So guess what he said? I'm going to make a substitution. I'm going to make it convenient. It's too hard to come to church. And that is the message that Jeroboam gave his people. He said, oh, it's too hard for you to pack up and move everything down to Jerusalem 3 times a year. Here's what we're going to do. He said, you know, I've come from Egypt, and I got a good idea there. He said, let's make 2 worship centers, one at Dan. And Dan was as far north as you could go and still be just inside the borders of Israel. He said, we'll set up 1 calf at Dan. And he said, well, we know, remember Jacob? Remember our father, Jacob, Israel? And remember that wonderful vision he had of God at Bethel? Well, we'll put up another calf at Bethel. And that'll be Bethel, house of God. And so you can choose whether you go to Dan or whether you go to Bethel, and you can go there instead of going all the way to Jerusalem. So they, oh, yes, we like it. It's easier that way. We want it to be real convenient for us. So that's what they did. And so they're operating the northern kingdom. And then you have the tribes of Benjamin, Judah, and about 1/3 of the tribe of Levi, and some smattering of Simeon in the southern kingdom. Now, while the 2 kingdoms were operating simultaneously, there were times Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, never had a good king. All bad kings. Bad, 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 bad. Never a good king. Judah, however, would have good king, bad king, good king, bad king. And in times when they had a good king, there would be revival, presence of God. And you know, people will go any distance, whether it's convenient or not, to be where the presence of God is. And so what happened is there would be times of revival, particularly under, and it actually is recorded under when King Asa was king of Judah. And it says, and they fell to him out of Israel. And it named tribes. They went to the southern kingdom in times of revival. And sometimes they didn't go back home. Sometimes they just stayed. So there would be smatterings there. And then, and I'm fast forwarding this, in 722 BC, Assyria came down and led the northern kingdom captive. And we know what happened to them. The southern kingdom was still operating, and they operated until 586 BC when Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, came down and, of course, destroyed Jerusalem. So this is what we need to remember, because we've taken the tribes in their order of age. So Benjamin's the youngest, but Benjamin did stay loyal to Judah. And so they basically, the southern kingdom of Judah was made up primarily of the tribes of Judah. Why? Because that was the kingly tribe. And so obviously they're going to be there. And the tribe of Benjamin. It is, and some of you have probably heard, and this is actually a derogatory term in our day, and you'll find that anti-Jewish people will say, oh, the Benjamins have all the money. Ever hear that? It's a very nasty statement. They'll talk about the Benjamins, and sometimes you'll hear that. Well, in other words, they just use that as a slur for all the Jewish people. So, but Benjamin, and of course Joseph, obviously loved his brother Benjamin, but basically he just got to know toward the end of his life. But blessing for Benjamin. Let me ask you this, and we'll time is up. So, sorry. Anyone know somebody in the tribe of Benjamin? Paul. Yeah. Saul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul. And there's some really interesting things, and I might refer to them, I have taught them before. Understand, if it was not for God's grace and mercy, there would never have been a tribe of Benjamin to survive. They would have been totally wiped out. And because there had been a horrible, aren't you glad that the Bible doesn't whitewash anything? It doesn't. It talks about that incident. And because of that, they literally would have wiped out the tribe of Benjamin. You say, why are you bringing that up? Because the Apostle Paul, in the book that we've been reading that took us back to the Trace and the Tribes of the book of Romans, said, if it had not been for God's grace and mercy, we wouldn't be here. He said we'd have been wiped out. That is absolutely true, because God helped them come up with a plan. Because understand, what had happened, there was an incident where none of the tribes were not given any of our wives to marry Benjamites. Well, guess what happens? I hate to tell you, but if that would have remained and they couldn't get any wives, there would not have been any Benjaminites left. And guess what? There wouldn't have been this. There would have been this. So when Paul was writing that, he was knowing exactly what he was thinking. He said, had it not been for that God kept them remnant, we're so glad he did. So Benjamin is an important tribe, and we're going to look at how God moved and where Benjamin is today. Kind of interesting. You know where Benjamin is, and you're going to know too. If you're watching tonight, if you would like to let me know that you are watching, we would love to know. We would, in fact, I'm going to specifically ask you this week, if you're watching from anywhere. I know we've had actually people watching from Israel, the Philippines, Europe, and any other state that you're watching, and even if you're watching in Canton, Ohio tonight, would you do me a favor? Just call in and when we answer the phone, say, I just want you to know I'm watching from. And we want to know where, we know you're watching out there because we have a way of knowing where you're watching from. But we would like to hear from you personally. If you have a prayer request, we would love to, as a class, pray for those prayer requests. If you have a question or a comment about the teaching, we would love to hear from you. If you would like to give in response to the teaching you receive, you can do so. You can mail in your love offering for the Wednesday night class to the address that's on our website. You can drop it off in the drop box if you're local. We have a drop box right in the lobby of the church. You can drop it in. But we would love to hear from you. We have a Joe Ash chest in the classroom. You can also put an offering in. We will be looking at you. There will be class next Wednesday night, and I will be looking forward to seeing you either in the class or from a distance the following night. Have a wonderful, wonderful night, and know this, God loves you with an everlasting love.